Okay, so in class we learned a little bit about just some of the basics of making programs. We wrote a Hello World program where we printed Hello World, which looks like this, in case you don't remember. So now we're going to learn a little bit about loops and if statements, which are kind of the two main things that you can use to sort of extend your programs and make them do some pretty cool things. So I have right here, starting on line 3, a very simple loop. And I is just a variable. And we talked a little bit about variables in class, but a variable can be assigned to anything. So I can assign a variable to a string, I can assign it to a number, and we talked a little bit about how these things work, that strings are in quotes and numbers are like this, and you can have other numbers called floats. My weird number could be float, which has a decimal point in it. So those are some of the things that you can see. Now in a loop, you have a variable that will count down for you. So we put the range that we're going to count down. So if we want to print each one of these out, then we would see what those look like. So let's run this program, and we're going to save it. And you can see that it prints out it prints our hello world, of course, and then it prints out each number here. And you'll notice that it starts at 0. All counting starts at 0. It still does whatever you tell it to do 10 times, but it starts counting at 0. So we can do a couple of different things with our for I in range. So that's just, we could make this be 5, and it would print out 0 through 4. And what would be more interesting, of course, is if we did something like this, where we have it printing hello, so it would just print that 5 times. This is very useful for when you want to repeat things. So another thing that we can do is we can print things in strings. So we have a word here, and we can print each of those letters. So it does this first. It prints hello world by itself, and then it prints hello 5 times, and then it prints each letter separately on an individual line, one at a time. So that's what loops are usually good for. Now we can change this range here. We can start at 1 and go to 5. We could actually start at 1 and go to 20. And then if we put the number 2 in there, it will step by 2. So default is to go by 1. So it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But if you wanted to just do even numbers, it would go. If you put 2 in there, it will go by 2. So actually, that doesn't help us because we can't see what the numbers are. We just got a bunch of hellos again. So let's do that. So you can see that it starts at 1, and it does odd numbers because we started at 1. We could start at 0, and it would do even numbers. So you can see that it's 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. Maybe we want to start at 2. Maybe we don't care about 0, so we would start at 2. Do it that way. So this is your starting point, your end point, and then however you want to step by. So you might have something like this, 5 to 50, and you're going to step by 5. So then you've got 10, 15, 20. And this might be, we've used this, the stepping in a number of different ways. You want to print every other letter in a word, or you want to count by 5s, or when you're using this in graphics, you might want to draw a dot every 5 pixels or something like that. So that's what loops are useful for in that case. This is printing out your string. We could print every other letter. We could do a for I in range thing and print every other letter, so that's kind of useful. So loops are very useful. There's another kind of loop. These are called for loops. Another kind of loop is called a while loop. And usually what you do in a while loop is you say while something is true, keep doing something. So sometimes if you want something to go on forever, you might just put while true. And you would print some string or something like that. But that would go on forever and it would never stop, and that wouldn't be all that exciting. We have a number up here, so we could say while my number is greater than 0, we want to print the word world. Now we have to do something to keep doing something to this so that we get to 0 at some point. So we take my number and we're going to subtract 1 from it every time. So we're going to say my number equals my number minus 1. So every time it goes through this loop, first it's going to print the word world, and then it's going to subtract 1 from my number. So let's run that. So it prints it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which makes sense. It starts at 7, it goes down. So that's a while loop, and this is the typical way of constructing it. So those are loops. So let's do something with an if statement. If statements often come inside of loops, but they don't have to. We haven't really learned this yet, but let's say we want to get someone's name. And based on that input, we want to say if the name is, let's say, equal to this, then we'll say something. Okay, so we have, we're taking, this is a new construction, but you're going to get an input called the name, which is going to be saved as a variable called name. And then what it's going to do is it's going to see if that name is equal to this string. And if it is, then it's going to print this. And if it's not, it's going to print this other thing. This may not be the best example, but it's a pretty straightforward one. So let's run that. So it's asking me for my name here. So I'm just going to put in a random name. And as you can see, it did this one. So this is typically what an if statement looks like. You have an if. You're going to check and see if this is true. And you'll notice I have a double equals here. So when we assign variables, we use a single equals, and I just think of this as saying is. So my word is hello, my number is 7, my weird number is 3.5. And down here, this is a direct equals sign. So if my name is equal to Laura, then print oh hi. So another thing, I'm going to add an if statement to this loop. So I could say if my number is equal to 5, we'll print hello. So when it gets to 5, it will print something different. Okay, so let's look at our output over here. So you can see that it printed the first 2 worlds, and then when my number was equal to 5, it printed hello. So that was cool. And there are a lot of different things that you can do. If statements are really powerful. You can, there are ways you can do things like, say, if my name starts with a letter, and those are all things that I can show you in class or that you can look up yourself to see how those work. But these are great ways to create games, to create stories, especially interactive stories, where you can say if they choose a particular option, then this happens, and that kind of thing. So this is some of the basic structure of making a computer program. So I want to make a note here about the formatting and syntax really quickly because it's most important to get the concept, but you'll be really frustrated if you start to get error messages because you leave off some important things. So you'll notice in a loop, I have my for, I have a colon at the end of that for, and then this is indented. This often happens quite normally. For I in range 3. There are a lot of programs, so this makes you tab over. So you just want to tab over when you get to the bottom, when you get to the next line. So remember your colon, remember to tab over. The same is true for your while loop. You're going to have a colon after the first line where you establish your while, and then everything underneath that is going to be tabbed. And you'll notice that when I get to this if statement, I have an if statement, I have a colon, and then another tab. So this one gets, you can get pretty crazy. You can end up with ifs and while loops and for loops all nested into each other. With an if and else, you have the same thing. Like I said above here, you have an if statement, you have a colon, and then an indented line that tells you what to do. And your else statement, which it's just else, you don't have anything after it except for the colon, and then you're going to print something after it. So remember your colons, remember your indenting, otherwise you're going to get, so if I were to leave that off, I get this horrible, ugly red lettering over here, which is no fun. It does tell you have an error, and but it says unexpected token, new line, and it just takes a while sometimes for you to realize that that's because you've left off a colon. Or you've added an extra parentheses or something like that. So just keep those in mind as you're working on your loops and if statements.